Hello, welcome to this Lit in 5 video on the final part of Ian McEwan's Atonement, the chapter titled London 1999. So we're looking at this for important issues of crime, most importantly the ideas of guilt and atonement and the extent to which Bryony Tallis can seek to atone for what she's done previously. So let's have a look at some key quotes in relation to those crime ideas. So we're looking at older Bryony here, before we have the revelation of vascular dementia, the onset of that. Obviously that's got significance in terms of diminishing memories. So creating her novel, which we may see is designed to incriminate and after she has died, bring about justice and order. It takes on an extra importance now to arrange her thoughts in her narrative so that justice can be brought about even though her memory is declining. Okay, so just some casual openings here to this chapter in this section. There's still that compulsion or need to keep busy and distract myself. Still a little hint at sort of the guilt which still torments her, and keeping busy as a way of avoiding or blocking out the feelings or the recurrence of that guilt. We've got a little foreshadowing here of part of the reluctant process of letting go. This is in relation to completing her book. Okay, remember she's a very successful author now with many published works. So yes, it's the idea of, is it finished? The hard thing of saying that's my work done on my latest book. But this is just not any other ordinary or extra book, is it? By the author Bryony Tallis. Full circle here, cyclical. So we remember the controlling demon of the younger Bryony, which wanted everything just so, which I think is the two-word quote, along with controlling demon. Still that same compulsion here, look. The photocopied source is labelled, the drafts are in order, the borrowed book's ready for return, sort of paying her debt and her dues, if you like, and everything is in the right box file. I've always liked to make a tidy finish, all right? So in terms of justice and those areas of crime and criminality from the AQA diagram with the star on, there's a sort of hint at order and rectitude, trying to put things back in their place to atone and make things as right as possibly can be. Obviously she can't change time and reverse what happened or prevent what happened, but there is a nod towards that. Okay. Now, we're not in any way saying that Bryony deserves the cruelty of something as cruel as, vascular dementia, but she sees a parallel here between people who occupied Bedlam, poor souls who are tormented mentally in mental sort of health issues, and how people used to look at those as a source of general entertainment. That happened, if you can believe that, but it's true. I reflected in a self-pitying way on how I was soon to join their ranks. So, I don't know, you can see a sort of fate and karmic forces here, perhaps, in the sense that, Bryony Tallis doesn't live out to a grand old age, rich and affluent and enjoying life. There is a form of punishment which plagues her, and it's deeply tragic. Your view of that punishment might well change here if we look closely, based on Bryony's reaction to the news of her dementia. So this is the doctor giving her the diagnosis, the route map, loss of memory, simple nouns, language itself, cruel to an author and someone who's loved words so much, you would imagine. And soon after all, motor control, the autonomous nervous system. Bon voyage! So there's that kind of, sort of gallows humour, looking at that with kind of resilience. And then you get this, look, on the contrary, I was not distressed about the news, I was elated. So maybe that's the reaction of someone who, due to guilt, has been plagued by memories of the past. Maybe that's some kind of reprieve or let off in the fact that her memories will go, she'll no longer be tormented by the actions and the consequences she brought about. But very important that if memory and words are going to go, that she leaves things in order in a bid to bring about justice. There were 6 new box files on the shelves. Okay, so getting everything in place in order. Here's older Bryony's first moment where she's explicit and candid. It's a good word to use, open and honest about her deceit and her fabrication of things and her narrative previous to this. So she talks about how she kind of fudged certain historical details about the hospitals she worked in. So if you like, I actually worked in 3 hospitals, but I merged them in my description to concentrate all my experiences into one place. Now, I think this is a really useful quote. If you are bringing up in essays the idea of a fabricated narrative, a convenient distortion. Remember, McEwan said this is the novel of one hot day, and we've seen plenty of perspective images where heat sort of creates that wavy distortion and blurs how you see things and perceptions. Is the novel Atonement a convenient distortion, particularly with those fabricated moments where she artificially creates a sort of reunion to the 2 lovers, where she confronts why she has never spoken up all these years and is only choosing to posthumously after her life has ended to avoid libel and all those kinds of things. So is this moment here Bryony's defence against how she's chosen her method of bringing about justice posthumously, even though she's been silent all these years? And does she see this distortion, lack of truth, as the least of my offences against veracity? Now, here's our key moment when we re-engage or re-encounter the actual criminals here, or the actual perpetrators of the crime. Obviously, more so Paul Marshall than Lola Marshall. That's not what I'm saying at all. Now, look, wealth. All right, so the trappings of wealth and privilege. He was already tremendously wealthy, profiteering from war, if you like. All that link and the imagery associated with him of oiliness and chocolate and sweets and all these kinds of things. Olaginous, it's my favourite word, it means oily and greasy. Okay, it's coming through here again. So older Bryony is seeing a Rolls Royce, kind of a symbol of their wealth and privilege, really. They, the Marshalls, often passed through my mind, linked to the previous stuff about dementia and maybe losing the memory of this being a welcome reprieve. If she deserves that reprieve, that's entirely up to you. That's a different kind of argument, but bear that in mind. Usually, the Marshalls occurring without generating any particular feeling. I've grown used to the idea of them. Now, is that a necessity? Is that the way in which Bryony has had to cope with the thought that the Marshalls are still unpunished and extremely wealthy and have a public veneer of being these kind of charitable benefactors? The best analogy I can think of with the Marshalls now is Jimmy Savile, if you know much about him, openly and publicly donating large cheques to charity, but the monstrousness that was behind that veneer came to light in recent years, of course. So that helps you understand the depiction of the Marshalls here. Obviously this was written before Jimmy Savile was revealed, but I think that's a good sort of modern analogy to understand it. They still appear in the newspapers occasionally in connection with the foundation. So there they are, publicly donating large sums of money to various causes. So yeah, veneer is the really good word to use there. And if you're ever needing to talk about actual or worst or most criminal, certain essays have set that up previously. This is a fantastic section to talk about, okay? So that idea from King Lear again, plate sin in gold. So look at this, the good work that the Marshall Foundation has done for medical research, well, helped deny Robbie Turner of his promising medical career, if you remember, or the collection of this, or their generous funding of this. Guilt, okay? Arguably, manifestations of projected guilt at their wrongdoing, all right? Interesting hint here, look, the vigorous libel actions against national newspapers. So that's starting to hint that maybe their past has been rumoured and speculated about, but they have wealth on their side, and so they can exert pressure on national newspapers not to publish that, because it'll be costly and damaging to them as well. And there they are, look, Lord and Lady Marshall. Okay, posse of officials, an umbrella over the marshal's head. Yes, it's raining. You might see a bit sort of symbolic in there, shielding and protecting them, plating or covering sin in gold, to use that idea from King Lear again, as they descended the steps. Now look at this. I'm not, well, is Bryony a heroine here in her own peculiar way in which she's going about bringing justice? I held back. So yes, I doubt she'd want to bump into them. But you could see this as older Bryony biding her time, wanting to disappear or not be remembered by the marshals and just fade away into obscurity. Until such times, if it's going to happen, that when Bryony dies and the book is released incriminating the marshals, there's just a sort of a slow, gradual process of revenge or justice. Okay, so yeah, you thought I'd disappeared into the background, you've never heard anything about me. One day, all of a sudden, those national newspapers might receive the released, posthumous, post-HUMOUS manuscript or version of Bryony's novel, which does incriminate the supposedly beneficent or benefactor figures of Lord and Lady Marshall. This is meant to offend, this is meant to kind of bring about the reader's ire and anger. Around, look at the kind of pleasant, ha 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 ha, a chorus of general laughter at something Lord Marshall has said. Probably an awful joke, but which gets laughed at in a sycophantic way, because it's Lord Marshall cracking funnies and the done thing is to laugh. He's a criminal. Yes, he's aged here, but is this some kind of decay which is befitting the crimes he has done? So he leaned on a walking stick, a lacquered cane. There's a veneer, okay? A cane is a piece of wood, but there's an expensive artificial covering of lacquer, symbolic. Something of a trademark. You're reading it and you're thinking it's something of the Disney-esque villain here, or Monty Burns from The Simpsons, which Bryony then talks about in a moment, anticipates that very postmodern style of writing. Okay, I avoided a head-on encounter, held back, head-on encounter, concealed partly by the raised barrels and their concrete emplacement, partly by my tilted umbrella, I kept hidden. So I'm not saying she's some kind of ninja, all right, but there is this idea of staying out of sight to bide her time until it is the right time, the allowed time, to release her manuscript and bring about justice. Okay, there we go. So there's the ravages of age again, liver spots, purplish swags. At last he appeared, the cruelly handsome plutocrat. Age had shrunk his face. You've got these ideas of decay associated with him here, almost as like a punishment for his wrongdoing. Withering away in some kind of the picture of Dorian Gray, but not on the portrait. If you know that novel, it's actually showing on the exterior of the sinful man, unlike Dorian Gray, who remains ever youthful, but the painting decays in the attic. Some bitterness here towards Lola, which again is very understandable and justifiable, I think, from Bryony. Very sinister here. His hand was firmly on her arm, and the stick was not just for show. That obviously hinted something extremely dark and disgusting, okay? So I don't know, read into that what you will. It's often been remarked upon, this is a good quote, I should have highlighted this. It's often been remarked upon how much good he did in the world. Perhaps he spent a lifetime making amends. Amends, almost like a synonym for atonement, really. Okay. Now, again, Bryony Tallis has done this, helping wounded soldiers, all these kinds of things. Two different paths, but both driven by the same principle, to atone for wrongdoing. Okay, so lots of kind of cruel and kind of pointed remarks about Lola here, I think. Again, probably justifiably. As for Lola, my high-living, chain-smoking cousin, here she was, still as lean and fit as a racing dog, and still faithful. Who would have dreamed it? She knew, if you like, which side her bread was buttered. That may sound sour, but it went through my mind as I glanced across it. So, just an attack on Lola there for a kind of superficiality and staying with this man who abused her because of the privilege it brings, the wealth and privilege. The depiction of Lola here is some kind of eccentric, lady or millionaire or whatever is done here. And I was reading this, and when I first read it, I thought, oh, that looks like Cruella de Vil. I think I'm spelling that right. Cruella de Vil. Cruella de Vil. But that's exactly who Bryony likens it to, or McEwen has Bryony liken it to in a moment. But look at this, look. So we're getting the idea of sort of abuse in a hierarchy here. The idea that he beats her firmly on her arm, in control of her, and, you know, a dog which is faithful to a master, even though it's cruel towards it. It's unquestioningly faithful. So lots of condemnation of Lola and Paul Marshall here. There's a decent quote in terms of unreliable witness. That was in relation to, you know, the topic of makeup and stuff. But there's a general, you know, reasonable quote in terms of Bryony herself. She has been that. And that fabricated bit where Robbie questions her statement and whether she was telling the truth then or thought of herself as a liar. That's an important quote, I think. There's the Cruella de Vil. Parallels. She's almost become some kind of pantomimic Disney villain here. Both of them have. Is this a form of karmic justice and revenge? The fact that Paul Marshall had to be lifted into his seat, so he deserves the sort of cruelty of what aging does. And is this his form of punishment? The indignity of having to be helped, despite his wealth, despite his millions? Is the reader satisfied with that he has to suffer that? Or is that, as I suspect you would think, nowhere near enough in terms of accountability? All right. Seeing them laid something heavy on my heart. I was trying not to think or not to feel about it. So there's that strange kind of cruel paradox that maybe dementia is going to release Bryony from the thought of these repulsive people. Look at the competitiveness here as well, or the sense of competition. She's quite open about it, is Bryony, between herself and Lola. But Lola's health was on my mind. It's upsetting Bryony that Lola appears to be in lots of good health, despite chain smoking and despite being, you know, responsible for the lies and the deceit. Okay, I might outlive Paul Marshall, but Lola would certainly outlive me. The consequences of this are clear. The issue has been with us for years. As my editor put it once, publication equals litigation. But I could hardly face that now. So again, that sort of cruel paradox. The more and more dementia takes a hold of Bryony Tallis, the less she can be involved in a legal case proving or disproving what she said about the Marshalls is true. Strange quirk of paradoxical fate and cruelty that the illness leads to the truth able to be exposed. You could read this another way, of course. I'm not suggesting that. Well, one reading does suggest that maybe Bryony is keen to outlive Lola, and then that's some kind of victory over these horrible people if Bryony outlives Paul and Lola. But the other side of that would be, if I die before Lola, this is Bryony, and the manuscript gets published, there is someone around living to face the repercussions of the shame and the revelations of truth. So that might still be seen as a victory over Lola. From Beyond the Grave, posthumously, by Bryony Tallis. This section here is Bryony returning some of her research books back to the library or the museum here. This was her researching the accuracy of all her war details in part 2. But is this some kind of tangential victory? So an indirect, sort of at an angle victory? I'm not mathematical, but tangential will work here. The museum, which has helped Bryony complete her book, which ultimately is going to incriminate and punish the Marshalls, or at least their legacy, if they're not around or alive. The Marshall Foundation was about to make a grant to the museum, which has helped Bryony complete her book. So it's like, there you go. Kind of a double victory. It's only small. No way does it change what has happened or, put everything right again. But there's a little bit of sort of bitter, I don't know, maybe it's sweet from Bryony's perspective, a sweet sort of irony that the museum will benefit from these people who are about to be outed one day as the criminals they are. Here's an extremely handy quote if you find yourself needing to talk about Bryony justifying her fabrications and her using fiction, a novel, another book, to bring about justice, hopefully, after her death. A lot of qualification in that, lots of ifs and then this, and if that happens and this happens. But this is in reference to her military accuracy in writing her book, but it's a quote which resonates in terms of justifying her actions, I think. If I really cared so much about facts, I should have written a different kind of book. Okay, so for me, that's the clearest line of justification as to why she's going about her own peculiar, arguably ineffective style of justice and the manner she's going about it. Okay, here's something that's really important in terms of that idea of competition between Bryony and Lola. Was I competing with her? She was always the superior older girl, one step ahead. There's satisfaction here, look. And debate the psychology of this all you wish, but this is important in terms of revenge and justice, some key AO4 concepts which might form, a section C question. But in that final important matter, I will be ahead of her, Lola. While she'll live on to be 100, I will not be able to publish in my lifetime. Okay, so there's that idea that, I'm biding my time. I won't be around to see the effects of it, but justice will come. And in a way, Bryony's longevity, seeming that she's going to live a long, long time, will be a curse when justice and truth is finally revealed. Here's Bryony returning to her former home, which is now seems a hotel, I think it is, or some kind of country house. Interesting idea here is that the reference to this, it was always an ugly place. So regardless of brickwork and architecture, it's associated with ugliness. And from Bryony's perspective, it will always be ugly, all right? Look at the past stuff here. The ivy which is gone, approaching the first brick, no longer there. So you can erase certain things, but we've got the idea of what postmodern writers and thinkers call a palimpsest here, all right? So it's where you can see old stuff poking through the new one. It's like putting layers on top. So if this is the new image on top of stuff, you can see the sort of pencil marks and traces of the old. So therefore the old never really goes. And Bryony can sort of see the past actions, even though they're not there anymore. Interesting little take on memory and perspective, but coming from the now, where Bryony is, facing the onset of dementia and things. She doesn't recognise some of the family in front of her, the younger versions of, siblings who were her age, not a familiar face. I wondered if this was a foretaste of the incomprehension I had promised. Then slowly, people came into focus. So even now, at this old age, when she's nearing death, we still have this idea of things can be hazy and perceived incorrectly, but over enough time, with enough age and clarity, a true perspective on things can be arrived at, foreshadowing the whole idea of the book and the journey of the wrongness of the genuine criminal. Tie it into crime. Last few slides here now. So we have the reenactment as a touching little tribute to older Bryony here of her first bit of writing. She's a famous author now, but someone, God knows why, has kept hold of her first script of The Trials of Arabella. But look at the parallels here, okay? So suddenly she was right there before me, enacted by one of her nieces, I think. But look at this as a reflection on her older self, dual perspective again. That busy, priggish, conceited little girl. And she was not dead either, all right? So alive again because it's being recreated. I knew the words were mine of the play, but I barely remembered them. However, look at this step. The moral drawn from the Trials of Arabella rings as true now as it did then, because Arabella almost learned too late that before we love, we must cogitate. Just means think about stuff in more detail. So there's poking fun at her younger self for using posh words unnecessarily. However, take that back to page 228, where the younger Bryony and her crush on Robbie Turner, before we love, we must think. So there's the bitter lesson of experience, which the older Bryony has tried to come to terms with, or has not come to terms with, has had to live with in terms of guilt for all her life. So before we love, we must think. I've spoken to you in recent essay feedback about something called the follies of youth, the mistakes we all make because we're young and inexperienced and not worldly. In memory, the play, The Trials of Arabella, distorted perspective again by a child's sense of time. It had always seemed the length of a Shakespeare play. In actuality, it was over in 10 minutes. So then, now, the follies of youth, how our perceptions of previous events were contingent, were based on or dependent on, at that time, a child's perspective. And the word distorted. It was wrong, it was flawed. But in reality, the older, wiser person can see things as they are. So be all over that in terms of AO2 of perspective, all right? And is that being, in terms of AO4 and crime, is this being offered up as a justification? I think there's a lot of mileage to that. Bryony, younger Bryony, genuinely believed she was acting in terms of righteousness and truth. As she grew older, she saw the error of that, a distortion. Last three slides, there's a handy kind of all-purpose quote for showing that idea of, one crazy summer. McEwan has said he's been inspired by lots of Jane Austen novels, which have similar things of the craziness of one hot summer of 18-something. And there it was, that is still true of everything which occurred, the consequences of that hot summer of 1935. Piero, her cousin, was nodding emphatically. I explained that it was entirely my fault the rehearsals fell apart then, because halfway through I had decided to become a novelist. And there's one of those kind of ha moments at a dinner party where people politely laugh at a joke. But it's quite interesting there what is not said. So the rehearsals fell apart because of an awful tantrum and Bryony going out in a huff, whipping some nettles, Robbie walking across a field, giving her a note, all those consequences. But it's what's not said there, which is very telling, I think. Okay, two key quotes and two key chunks here. Let's take them one at a time. I like this quote here, a sense of regret. I've been thinking about my last novel, the one that she's about to release after her death, the one that should have been my first. So there's a regret that she hasn't, she's, quite fairly been accused by herself through her fictitious Robbie and Cecilia, of being a coward, of not coming forward earlier and making amends and atoning prior to that. But there's an admission of that, the one that should have been my first. Here's another important justification, very much towards the end of the book, the frame bit of the framing narrative. Now the author is talking to us outside of the fabricated story. There was our crime, Lola's, Marshall's, mine. And from the second version onward, I set out to describe it. I've regarded it as my duty, sense of obligation, burdened with putting things right, to rectify, to disguise nothing, the names, the places, the exact circumstances. Various editors have told me over the years my forensic memoir could never be published while my fellow criminals were alive. You may only libel yourself and the dead. So she's offering that up as maybe the legal justification as to why she's not gone about this previously. Okay, so the sage advice has been, you can only ever libel yourself and the dead unless you want kind of expensive battle, and a long battle as well. So there seems to be sort of legal sense as to why she's not tried to atone earlier. Another nod here that the Marshalls have been trying to silence this all their life, active about the court since the 40s, defending their good names, irony, veneer and all this, with a most expensive ferocity. Now, you may see some kind of karmic justice in that, in the sense that the vast wealth they have accumulated, profiting off war, anything else really, all that has done is enabled them to try and preserve their name, which is absolutely blackened with sin, but hasn't been brought to light. But there's maybe some kind of sweet or bitter, depending on your point of view, irony that all the money he accumulates has served nothing except to try and preserve that veneer. Yes, they'll have had other benefits too. I'm not saying it hasn't been, of benefit to them, but there's an interesting sort of poetic justice in there, maybe. Look at the implications and the hints here. They spent a good deal of the 40s defending their good names, a most expensive ferocity. Anyone who defends themselves with ferocity, starting to secrete the idea there's something to hide. One might think they'd had something to hide. There's a malicious glee, I think, there in the way Bryony words that. Okay, that truth will out, truth will appear, and eventually, not as quickly as they ought to have done, will feel justice. All right, think yes, but not right. Okay, so here's their strategy. Remember a minute ago when she was wanting to stay back, hidden from them, and not be seen in public by the Marshalls, just to bide her time and wait until the moment was right to bring about justice? Look at this. The obvious suggestions have been made. Displace, transmute, dissemble. Bring down the fogs of the imagination. I know I cannot publish until they are dead, and as of this morning, I accept that will not be until I am. So I think sort of that reveals that Bryony has regularly or frequently had the wish and the desire to incriminate and punish them, but she has to sort of give in to that and surrender, that some kind of justice towards the Marshalls is better than none. Final two quotes here. This is really important in terms of the justification of her lies regarding the happy ending, or happier ending for the lovers. There was a crime. So not hiding it now. But there were also the lovers. Lovers and their happy ends have been on my mind. It occurs to me I have not travelled so very far after all since I wrote my little play. So a sort of cyclical journey. It's only in this latest version, the final one she is going to submit, that the lovers end well. All the preceding drafts were pitiless, so previous drafts didn't have them having a reunion. But now I can no longer think what purpose would be served if, say, I tried to persuade my reader that Robbie Turner died of, and then there's the actual tragic fates, that I never saw them in that year, that my walk across London was not true, that the letters the lovers wrote are in the archives of the War Museum. How could that constitute an ending? What sense or hope of satisfaction could a reader draw from such account? Right, that's very important in terms of AO4. Arguably, the expectations of crime writing, and your other experience of that, of course, is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, is that we get an unknotting, a denouement, satisfaction, order of pieces being put back into place and order being restored. There's a justification for it. Whether you agree with that, that's entirely up to you. But there it is from the author's mouth. And it's one of compassion. Look, I couldn't do it to them. The life she denied them of is too bitter and painful for her. So she fabricates, a word I've used a lot in these, so get comfy using it, a happier ending. Okay, here's our last little mention of water imagery, which I've mentioned in lessons. You should know what that refers to. I face an incoming tide of forgetting. Okay, so here it's maybe a washing away, and a welcome one at that. Remember, Bryony is sort of Lady Macbeth trying to scrub away blood as guilt of the fate she's dealt to Robbie. Here, this incoming tide of forgetfulness and oblivion, I think, is actually welcomed. All right, so she no longer has to dwell on such painful memories. The book will do it for her. She can fade off into oblivion. So her final sort of words on this matter. When I am dead and the marshals are dead, and the novel is finally published, we will only exist as my inventions. Bryony, herself in third person, will be as much of a fantasy as the lovers who share a bed in Bolam, and enrage their landlady. But what really happened? The answer is simple. The lovers survive and flourish. So that's wish fulfillment, okay? We know factually, historically, it did not happen. The only course that Bryony has left to her is to put it into fiction and bestow or give the people whose lives she ruined some kind of order and justice and salvation, which they deserve according to the author. My fortuitous sister and a medical prince survive to love. So she does have noble, benevolent, kind intentions with her lie or fabrication. Last slide. Even as she fabricates, she completely understands there is no atonement for God or novelists, even if they are atheists. She's absolutely not looking to be excused for her previous actions. She just wants you to understand the measures she has taken to try and mitigate and rectify, in the limited means she has possible, her previous actions. Another quick reference to water here as well. Feeling waves of tiredness beat the remaining strength from my body. Remember that simile from the first video? Beating like a child, or beaten like a child, sorry. The floor seems to be undulating beneath my feet. So waves of the floor in sort of waves and movement. Perspective again. Previously it was heat, now it's kind of water, distorting how she sees things. Okay, final attempt at justification here. I like to think that it isn't weakness or evasion, but a final act of kindness. A stand against oblivion and despair to let my lovers live. I gave them happiness. Ooh, that's rather problematic, isn't it? Yes, in her fictitious version, she gave them happiness, but that can't really erase the unhappiness she caused them. Focus turns to herself again, so is the egoist returning here. I was not so self-serving as to let them forgive me. Now, you have to give her credit for that. She didn't fabricate a scene where Robbie kind of grumbles and growls for a bit and then gives her a lovely big hug and says it's okay. Not quite, not yet. Look at how this sentence starts with a conditional tense. If I had the power to conjure them at my birthday celebration, Robbie and Cecilia still alive, it's not impossible, but now I must sleep. That line's quite ambiguous to me. Is she still flirting with the idea that she might have one last edit of her novel and fabricate yet another scene to restore an even happier ending for the two people whose lives she ruined? But then we get, nope, can't quite do it now. I must sleep. And they are the final words of the book. So we don't know if there's one more intervention made to restore or a greater act of kindness. But let's not go there, okay? She wants you to see how her artifice, her fabricated work, is done in benevolence, an act of kindness. You can disagree with that, but that's her intention. Okay, end.